What's up, everybody? The September data slate is coming very, very soon, and I've got a wish list for our space bugs. This entire video is going to be talking about what I think would be amazing to adjust and change for the Tyranids to make them a more competitively viable faction within the meta right now. Hopefully, not too broken. I've got some cool ideas. Will they happen? Who knows? But let's see what they are. I believe that the struggles with Tyranids right now in the meta are, yes, kind of because of the Imperial Knight, Chaos Knight, Death Guard, high toughness skews that have been running around and just stomping everyone. But I also think it goes hand in hand with the mission play that is currently active in the meta. And Tyranids have a couple of problems that make them, struggle into this new style of mission play. First up, Tyranids are actually pretty fragile. I know Norn emissaries can tank a lot of stuff, Maliceptors can tank a lot of stuff, but if you look at it, a lot of the units that people like to take in Tyranids, unless you're going full monster spam, can just be easily one-shot by an Imperial Knight. Like Canis Rex picks up a lot of stuff. I guess he does that regardless, but still, any Tyranid without an endfold just folds very, very quickly to the current meta. And that's one of the problems that Tyranids have. In addition, we don't punch back hard enough, generally. In broad strokes, the faction does not do nearly as much damage as a lot of other top factions out there in the game right now. We just don't. I mean, we haven't the entire edition. We lean more into mission plays, scoring secondaries, and primary denial. However, with the way the new mission pack has shaken up and with challenger cards, it kind of discourages objective and primary denial, because if you take somebody off an objective, let's see, you steal an objective for 5 points, they don't get 5 points, but then all of a sudden they're able to get a challenger card, so they basically get a free 3 points from that by taking them off an objective and denying them primary. Instead of denying them 5 whole points, you are only denying them really 2. And if they're going second in the bottom of turn, they can just score a whole bunch of primary points at the end of the game and really diminish any kind of denial that you put on them throughout the early stages of the game. And that kind of play pattern really, really discourages the way that Tyranids have like sent out Gargoyles or Hormagaunts or all of these smaller units to really sink your opponent into a primary deficit. The current mission pack, it's if you go second, you lean heavy into mission play, and you just hold back a little bit, and so that you get that final primary score at the end. Or if you go first, you tend to lean very aggressively and try to table your opponent before they are allowed to sink those points in the later part of the game, especially with the bottom turn primary scoring. So both of those things Tyranids are not great at, because they're not going to be super, super durable to wait around to the end of the game, and they're going to have a hard time tabling the opponent. A lot of people say that when the top armies are nerfed, then all of the mid and the lower armies will just get better because those top armies are nerfed and then they're worse. And then so the bottom or mid armies are just going to be able to compete up against them even better. I think that's sometimes true. Of course, statistically, yes, that's going to make everybody be a little bit better. However, the state of where Tyranids are, and I still love Tyranids, but the fact that they have trouble doing the things I described in the previous slide, I'm not really sure that just nerfing the top end and kind of minimally adjusting the bottom or the middle part of the meta is really going to help the Tyranids too much. In addition, I believe that, honestly, Death Guard, Imperial Knights, and Chaos Knights, those were the 3 factions that were quote-unquote emergency nerfed. I honestly think they're still very, very strong. Like, Death Guard still has a whole bunch of units of very high toughness and just busted rules. So I'm not sure the play pattern of just adjusting the top end of the meta and hoping that the lower armies reach up to that part is actually really going to make too much of a difference this time around, especially because it doesn't address the issues that bugs have with the current mission pack, the details that I talked about in the previous slide. I think if they again worked on just addressing the top end of the meta just some marginal changes. I think, of course, Tyranids would get marginally better. They would get a little bit better, but the core and the playstyle of their army don't perfectly fit within the play pattern that Games Workshop is wanting us to play in the new chapter approved. I think my first idea would just be, it's very simple, just small points decreases. And that's going to, the idea of that is to increase our survivability by just small point decreases, giving us access to one or two more smaller units so that we can afford to initiate trade wars or initiate primary switches without really dedicating too much to the board and without putting too much out there. I definitely think our mid-sized monsters are still too expensive. I think the Screamer Killer, the Harspecs, and Carnifex has definitely come to mind, those monsters who lean more heavily to the melee side. I think they're still too expensive. I think there was a hesitation to adjust them too much because of Subterranean Assault, and Subterranean Assault being able to get 6-inch charges and everything. However, Harspecs is bounce, AP2 on their big attacks and AP1 on their small attacks. I don't know. They don't really activate into units that are of similar point costs and of similar toughness in other factions. Like if you put a Harspecs into a bloat drone or one of the many mid-size vehicles that Death Guard have, I don't think a Harspecs is going to confidently kill that, and then Death Guard definitely has the ability to smack back. I'm done trashing on Death Guard. I think. I don't know. But it's just stuff like that where the Tyranid monsters, I think they are pointed cheaply, but I just don't think that their data sheets still support the points cost that other factions probably would be okay with. And that's because other factions might have rules that allow for those data sheets to kind of like get turned to 11 with their lethality. Tyranids generally do not have access to those kinds of buffs. In addition, I think walking back some of the point changes that happened previously, like Tyrannifex is going up to 200 points and the Execrant's going up to 140 points, there's an argument that that also doesn't really need to happen. Is that really going to change too much? Maybe. I don't know. If you want to run 3 Execrants, bringing them back down to 135 or 130 gives you 15 more points, 30 more points within your list. I think that definitely could shake some things up, maybe allow you to try a different unit that wasn't able to be fit anymore. And it would be a nice slice of life. Slice of life by maybe allowing for one or more scoring units through those 30 extra points, those 20 extra points that might be happening. Tyranids might be able to hold primary a little bit better. Maybe you can fit another Lictor in to get access to a really strong lone op and just sit on objective better. Or maybe it's going to allow you to have an additional Hormigaunt squad that you can feel way more comfortable at throwing up down the table a little bit quicker and, pressuring your opponent in a way that you might have to if you end up going first. Now, here's my spicy idea. I don't think this is going to happen, but I think this would be pretty sweet and it would match up with some of the buffs that we already had. If ranged weapons get +1 to strength if they're in Synapse range, that would be phenomenal for us. It really, really would. If you think about all of the profiles that would benefit very greatly, there's just a couple that immediately come to mind. Execrant going to strength 10. That's really, really good. Strength 10 for Execrants right now would be just phenomenal. Maleceptor's going to strength 11. And then Zoanthropes, I think, would definitely benefit from this the most. Their blast weapon would be strength 8, which I think would be very, very powerful. Strength 7 is really actually one of the worst strengths to be at. I think you're not really getting too much benefit besides against like Custodes. You get a benefit from going strength 7 to or strength 6 to strength 7. But the Zoanthropes being at strength 8 would really, really help. I think that would be phenomenal. And then also them being at strength 13, allowing for them to activate into a toughness 12 vehicles and monsters seems pretty strong. It's thematic, Tyranids is supposed to get their strength in the direction from the hive mind, and the hive mind is going to speak to them and connect to them through Synapse. So if they're close to the Synapse and the hive mind, why don't they shoot a little better? I do think this is probably too strong. And I am always leaning on the pessimistic side of buffs and stuff. like this because I don't want to get my hopes up too high. But I do think there might be a point where this puts Tyranids to a point that maybe they're even too strong. Maybe they limit it to not in the range of Synapse, but units that have the Synapse keyword get +1 to the strength. I don't know. In addition, it might also be annoying to keep track of, maybe because then you're going to have multiple different profiles. Are you going to start assuming that you're always in Synapse, and then one time you'll slip up and your exocrine should have been firing at strength 9 instead of strength 10? Who knows? I do, however, think it would be a great play pattern, and it would be really cool to kind of reward players for good positioning and making sure that they're aware of Synapse. Synapse is basically like our army rule, besides Shadow in the Warp, of course, and I just feel like it would be cool if it just gave us a little bit more. My last spicy take is, the Games Workshop, please fix Synaptic Nexus. Please just do something with it. Synaptic Nexus had, in my opinion, one of the highest potentials. Very, very cool detachment style. Very cool, rules concept. It just falls flat. It just feels like the detachment is written for a half of the codex that was never really given. The imperatives are just kind of weird. They make you want to be melee, but also a lot of the Synapse units that we want to use are more ranged. And then it also kind of feels like it doesn't really buff Synapse units. It's more of like a crutch for units that are not within Synapse, like Hormigons. I don't know. I think if we rework Synaptic Nexus to look like the 9th edition Tyranid imperatives, it would be really, really sweet. If you're not familiar with Tyranids in 9th edition, basically different Synapse units had different powers that you could pop once per game, right? Like, I think warriors were exploding 6s and melee. Zoanthropes gave everything within Synapse a 4-up invulnerable save. There was a unit that gave +1 to hit. I think Hive Tyrant gave fallback and charge or something. I think this would be a really cool idea to encourage a more diverse roster in your army list, and also allow for a lot more toolbox play within the detachment. I think that would be really, really sweet, and I think it would be a really, really fun detachment to play. That would probably be my favorite detachment to play, if we had a detachment that gave a little bit of buffs to Synaptic data sheets specifically, that then allowed for the rest of the army function a little bit better off of them. Again, I'm not like, something like this would be very cool, but I'm not sure this is something that Games Workshop is wanting to do. However, bottom line, some adjustments to Synaptic Nexus would be phenomenal. In my opinion, I think Synaptic Nexus is in need of more change and buffs and help than Crusher Stampede is and was when Crusher Stampede was adjusted. What am I actually expecting, though? I'm putting my wish list away. I'm putting my thinking hat on, seeing what actually could happen. Here's what I think is actually going to be happening. First up, I think we're going to have 1 or 2 units that have some small nerfs to adjust. I think there's a chance that Raveners might go up a little bit in points. I, of course, don't 1000% agree with that. I think Raveners are a good unit. The reasoning why I think that they might be adjusted a little bit is because they're a linchpin unit in Subterranean Assault, one of our most successful detachments right now, and they were just introduced into the wild with a points total because it's a new data sheet basically, and I don't think Games Workshop has had the opportunity to reflect on the data sheet yet, so this would be an opportunity for them to adjust it if they see fit. But I think it would be nice if regular Raveners went up a little bit, that Hyper Adapted went down. So if you're taking the 10-man brick, the big old block, that points total stays relatively the same, and I could see that happening. But, I think on the positive end for Tyranids, I think that units that were nerfed should be walked back a little bit. I think the Tyrant Effects and Exocrines, they're great data sheets. The Tyrant Effects is swingy as all hell. It's definitely a casino cannon. So for it being 200 points and then sometimes doing nothing the entire game seems kind of rough. And it just being a little bit more affordable, even if it's 190 or something like that, could be really good. Exocrine, I don't anticipate the nerf being walked back at all, but I think, going back down to 135 could be a good spot for the Exocrine. I think there's potential for some additional rule change, but I think this go around we're probably just going to see points adjustments And Games Workshop is probably again going to lean on nerfing the top end of the meta as opposed to changing a whole bunch of stuff within the middle pack of the meta and the lower part of the meta. I do think that they like that pattern of more nerfing the good guys than bringing up the lower guys too much, and it does kind of make sense because you don't want the entire meta to just do a 180 flip, because that would give everybody seasickness or whatever or something. But more importantly, what are you expecting? Write down in the comments below what kind of changes that you are wanting for our incredible space bugs. Do you agree with some of the things I said? Are you excited about maybe some of the ideas that I have? And I'm sorry if you are, because if I have the ideas, then that almost for sure means they're not going to happen, right? Anyways, let me know in the comments below, and I'd love to hear you. All right, that's it for this video today. Again, let me know what you think. What are you hoping for in this new data slate? I think there's good potential for Tyranids getting a little bit of a shakeup and a little bit of a buff, but I always like to hedge my expectations, because I do think Games Workshop tend to work a little bit more with the scalpel than a giant hammer and give things incredible buffs or debuffs. Thank you for commenting, like, and subscribe, and do all those cool things, and I'll see you next time. Bye.